The air in the restricted basement archives of the British Museum was heavy, thick with the scent of aged parchment, preservation chemicals, and the subtle, lingering dust of millennia. Outside, London slept beneath a typically miserable drizzle, the sound muffled by the thick Victorian stone walls. Inside, under the cool, harsh glow of fluorescent tubes that struggled to pierce the gloom, Dr. Alistair Finch worked. He was a man defined by meticulousness, his tweed jacket slightly rumpled, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his entire posture radiating the intense, focused energy of an academic on the precipice of madness or breakthrough. He wasn't a historian by trade. He was a cosmologist, trained at Cambridge, whose professional existence had always revolved around the clean, predictable mathematics of orbital mechanics. Yet, here he was, staring not at equations, but at baked clay tablets. Specifically, tablet K3551, a seemingly innocuous fragment of Sumerian cuneiform, catalogued vaguely as a cosmological inventory. Its tiny, wedge-shaped script detailed, among other things, the movements of celestial bodies that were definitively not the sun, moon, or the 5 classical planets known to the ancients. It spoke of a great crossing star, a radiant traveler, whose path brought chaos and renewal in cycles measured not in human lifetimes, but in vast epochs. The tablet was cool to the touch, feeling profoundly heavy for its size, heavy with the weight of disputed history. Dr. Finch adjusted his spectacles, the reflection of the tablet gleaming in the lenses. For years, the academic community, his peers, his old tutors, the establishment he respected, had dismissed such texts, particularly those popularized by authors like Zecharia Sitchin, as fringe fantasy, the domain of enthusiasts and charlatans. Sitchin's work, which postulated the existence of Nibiru, the 12th planet, and its inhabitants, the Anunnaki, was considered professional poison. To even mention it in a formal paper was career suicide in the hallowed halls of British science. But the mathematics had changed everything. 6 months ago, the asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system Atlas Observatory in Hawaii, a crucial component in planetary defense, had flagged an anomaly. Not an asteroid, not a standard comet, but an interstellar object. They christened it 3J Atlas. Its trajectory was bizarre, highly retrograde, possessing an extreme inclination relative to the ecliptic, and moving with a momentum that defied standard gravitational modeling based solely on the known Sol system architecture. It was traveling too fast, yet paradoxically, it seemed to be slowing down in preparation for a tight gravitational slingshot. Alistair had been on a research trip in Edinburgh when the initial data dropped, sipping a frankly abysmal cup of tea in a chilly university annex. He remembered the feeling vividly, a sudden cold dread that started in his chest and spread outward. The trajectory looked familiar, disturbingly so, to models he had run years ago as a graduate student. Models based on hypothetical planetary mass objects needed to explain the observed gravitational perturbations in the distant Kuiper belt, perturbations often glibly referred to as Planet 9. But this trajectory was even wilder, more ancient. It mirrored the mythological descriptions of Nibiru, the destroyer and creator, almost perfectly. The odds statistically were astronomical, yet the data persisted. Now, back in his rather cramped Cambridge flat, a tidy, slightly cluttered space overlooking a perpetually damp courtyard, Finch was living a double life. By day, he maintained his veneer as a respected, if slightly eccentric, stellar dynamicist, teaching undergraduates about black holes and the life cycle of stars. By night, fueled by instant coffee and a terrifying obsession, he became a clandestine mythologist, correlating astronomical telemetry with the oldest known human writings. He felt like a spy in his own professional landscape, constantly looking over his shoulder, certain that if his colleagues discovered his deep dive into Sumerian cosmology, he'd be laughed out of the department, his tenure revoked faster than you could say cuneiform. The challenge wasn't just connecting Three-Eye Atlas to Nibiru. It was understanding why this object, a small, icy interloper, was traveling precisely along the predicted path of a supposed planet many times the size of Earth. Was Three-Eye Atlas merely a scout, a piece of debris shed millennia ago by the larger body, or was the mythology fundamentally misunderstood? He pulled up the Atlas spectral analysis on his monitor. The object was generating an enormous complex coma, a hazy envelope of gas and dust as it approached the inner solar system. This coma was unusual. Instead of the typical water vapor and carbon compounds, Three-Eye Atlas was exhibiting strong signatures of gold and platinum isotopes, extremely rare for a standard comet originating from the Oort cloud. Gold, the very substance the Anunnaki myths claimed, was the reason for their visits to Earth. The coincidence felt less like chance and more like a cruel cosmic joke. Finch ran a hand through his thinning grey hair, the stress etching deeper lines around his eyes. He thought of the endless nights spent meticulously translating the Sumerian texts, verifying Sitchin's initial controversial readings against newly digitized high-resolution images of the tablets. The ancient people, who built ziggurats and invented writing, seemed to possess a chillingly accurate knowledge of a celestial body whose existence modern science still actively denied. The narrative was clear in the texts. The Anunnaki came from Nibiru. They manipulated early human genetics to create a slave species to mine gold, which they needed for their planet's atmosphere. This story, so fantastical, now found a disturbing echo in the high-resolution spectral data emanating from Three-Eye Atlas, hurtling towards us from the deep blackness of space. If this beginning already made you rethink what you thought you knew about history and the stars, just imagine what lies ahead. The journey into the truth behind the Anunnaki and Nibiru is only beginning. So go on, leave a like and subscribe to the channel right now and ring that notification bell. Because here, every video reveals something few dare to show, and you definitely don't want to miss the next twist in this cosmic tale. The fear that gripped Dr. Finch wasn't merely professional embarrassment. It was the existential dread that accompanies the realization that foundational truths about humanity, our origins, our place in the cosmos, were built on deliberate, meticulous lies, maintained for thousands of years. The Sumerian tablets, these small, brittle pieces of clay, weren't just history. They were a warning, a detailed astronomical schedule written in mud and fire. He leaned closer to the monitor, zooming in on the deep infrared spectrum of Three-Eye Atlas. The data was unequivocal. There was an unnatural regularity in the emission lines, suggesting not a random celestial body, but something far more structured, perhaps even artificial. But how could a comet, or whatever this object truly was, be structured? This introduced a completely new level of impossibility, challenging the very bedrock of his scientific training. The air within the vast, Gothic reading room of the library was cold, heavy with the weight of centuries of scholarship. Alistair Finch was surrounded by towering shelves of hardbound wisdom, yet he felt entirely isolated. His research demanded a synthesis of disciplines, archaeology, astronomy, linguistics, that no single academic specialty would tolerate. He was poring over the canonical texts of Mesopotamian mythology, specifically the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. In these texts, the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, played a pivotal role, not as ethereal spirits, but as powerful, almost corporate entities, governed by a hierarchy led by the deities Anu, Enlil, and Enki. The story, as translated and interpreted, describes a time when the heavens were unstable. Tiamat, the primordial chaos monster, often interpreted as a large planetary body, was struck and destroyed by Marduk, who Sitchin famously linked to Nibiru, or a gravitational agent of Nibiru. Tiamat's remnants formed the Earth, Kai, and the asteroid belt, the Hammered Bracelet. This wasn't merely poetry. If interpreted physically, it was a precise account of a massive planetary impact, a defining moment in the formation of the inner solar system. But how could the Sumerians, operating without telescopes or advanced mathematics, have documented such an ancient cataclysmic event, predating their civilization by billions of years? The only plausible answer, and the one that chilled Finch to the bone, was that the account was relayed by intelligent, long-lived observers who were present when the catastrophe occurred, the Anunnaki. He closed the heavy book, the leather cover sighing softly. He needed to step back, to breathe. This descent into historical forbidden zones was impacting his rational mind. He walked over to the tall, arched window, gazing out at the manicured lawns of the university, where undergraduates in scarves were cycling past, oblivious to the cosmic implications of Three-Eye Atlas, the crux of the Anunnaki narrative. The reason for their intervention on Earth was gold. They needed it to repair the diminishing atmosphere of Nibiru. This mineralogical need provided a motive for genetic engineering, resulting in Homo sapiens, a slave race created specifically for mining operations. This interpretation flew in the face of every single anthropological, evolutionary, and theological framework taught in the West. Yet the evidence from Three-Eye Atlas, that unusual spectral signature of high concentrations of precious metals, refused to be ignored. It was a mirror reflecting the oldest myth. Finch realized the structure of his investigation had to change. He couldn't rely solely on modern astronomical methods. He had to treat the ancient texts not as myths, but as field reports. If Nibiru was a real, massive planet, its return would not be announced by a small comet like Three-Eye Atlas alone. It would be announced by gravitational disturbances, changes in the orbital planes of the known outer planets, or perhaps, most critically, by the specific trajectory of an object deliberately placed along its path. A marker. Could Three-Eye Atlas be that marker? He returned to his desk, pulling out a printout of the latest tracking data from the European Space Agency, ESA. The trajectory of Three-Eye was not following a simple hyperbolic escape trajectory, as expected of most interstellar visitors. Instead, it was performing a slight, almost imperceptible course correction, guided by a non-gravitational force, possibly jets of gas. But these jets were asymmetric, far too precise for random cometary outgassing. It was steering. And steering towards what? Towards the predicted perihelion point of Nibiru's 3,600-year orbit, a point deep within the inner solar system, yet rarely close enough to cause catastrophic destabilization, barring extreme circumstances. The narrative of the Anunnaki speaks of their return coinciding with global upheaval. If Three-Eye Atlas was merely a herald, what was following? Finch felt the chill return, not from the cold library air, but from the realization that he might be calculating the arrival time of a highly advanced ancient civilization, one with a history of treating humanity as chattel. He looked at the vast volume of human knowledge surrounding him, millions of words, printed, bound, and archived, and wondered how much of it was merely a sophisticated smokescreen, obscuring a much harsher, simpler truth about our origins. He took a deep breath, fighting the urge to completely succumb to paranoia. He reminded himself of the scientific method: observation, hypothesis, testing. The observation was Three-Eye Atlas. The hypothesis was the Sumerian Nibiru connection. The testing required more data, specifically higher resolution imaging of Three-Eye Atlas's core. Was it just rock and ice, or did it contain something engineered? If you've managed to keep watching without hitting pause, this mystery has truly gripped you. It means this investigation into the cosmic shadows of history is essential viewing. So, strengthen this content. Hit the like button right now and send this video link to someone you know who needs to witness this paradigm shift. Your engagement drives the truth forward. Finch picked up his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in over a decade. Professor Helena Vance, an expert in archaeoastronomy based in Oxford. Helena had always walked the line between mainstream science and the esoteric, often ridiculed for her interest in megalithic alignment, but possessing an unparalleled depth of knowledge regarding ancient celestial observation. If anyone could confirm his analysis of the Sumerian star maps, it was her. The office of Professor Helena Vance was the polar opposite of Finch's Cambridge austerity. It was a joyful, colourful chaos, littered with globes, celestial maps dating back to the Elizabethan era, and dozens of pottery shards and replica artifacts. Dust motes danced in the pale winter sun, streaming through the high windows. Helena, a formidable woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a shock of silver hair, sat behind a desk piled high with books. She offered Finch a cup of strong builder's tea, a gesture of practical British solidarity against the absurdity of their current subject matter. "Alistair, old boy," she said, stirring her tea with brisk energy, "you sound absolutely rattled. And that takes some doing for a man whose blood type is essentially pure trigonometry. You're talking about Sitchin, Nibiru, and now you've thrown an interstellar rogue comet into the mix. Bloody good material for a sci-fi novel, perhaps, but not for a peer-reviewed paper." Finch ignored the jab, placing the high-resolution images of tablet K3551 and the 3i Atlas trajectory analysis side by side on her desk. He pointed first to the cuneiform, tracing the lines with a manicured finger. "Look at the inclination, Helena. The Sumerian depiction of the Great Destroyer shows an orbit intersecting the ecliptic at a precise angle, approximately 30 degrees. Now look at 3i Atlas." He tapped the astronomical chart. 33 degrees. Close enough to suggest correlation, given the potential for observational error 4,000 years ago. But that's not the chilling part. He slid a third piece of data over, his proprietary model detailing the mass estimate required to produce the observed gravitational ripple effect in the outer solar system. This model required a planetary body roughly 10 times the mass of Earth lurking far beyond Neptune. My model, the one I designed to satisfy the Planet 9 conundrum, places the required mass in a specific orbital resonance. When you overlay the trajectory of 3i Atlas onto this resonance, it's not an accident. 3i Atlas is moving along the gravitational wake of something enormous. It's tracing a path laid down by a body of planetary magnitude. Helena leaned forward, her earlier skepticism fading, replaced by the deep-set concentration of a scholar recognizing a pattern that shouldn't exist. She picked up the photo of the tablet, examining the minute details of the script. The Sumerians were phenomenal astronomers, Alistair. They tracked Jupiter's moons without optics, for heaven's sake. If they recorded a planetary body, they saw it. But this... She pointed to a specific pictogram on the tablet, a depiction of the sun encircled by 12 dots, one of which was elongated and highly inclined. This symbol isn't just descriptive, it's predictive. It defines the nadir, the crossing point, which according to their calculations should coincide with extreme terrestrial climate shifts and notably a period of great return. Finch nodded, relieved that someone else was finally seeing the terrible logic of his argument. The 3,600-year cycle, the Shah, the orbital period of Nibiru. If Sitchin was right about the period and the Sumerians were right about the inclination, then 3i Atlas isn't just a random interstellar chunk of ice. It's following a gravitational tide that has occurred like clockwork for millennia. A tide created by an approaching gravitational behemoth. But the question remained, why was the object 3i Atlas itself so small? If Nibiru was approaching, why send a tiny, dying comet as a herald? This detail was the intellectual thorn that still pricked Finch's confidence. Helena poured them both more tea. Alistair, if Nibiru is a planet of that size, it would be clearly visible in deep sky surveys. Even with its dark surface and eccentric orbit, it should be detectable by now, especially by infrared telescopes like WISE or JWST. Unless, Finch countered, his voice barely a whisper, it's not a planet in the traditional sense, unless it's cloaked, or unless Three-Eye Atlas is the only thing visible. Think about the Sumerian texts again. They describe the Anunnaki arriving in Shems, skyboats, highly advanced metallurgy, technology we can barely conceive of. If they possess technology capable of interstellar travel, is atmospheric cloaking or gravitational masking truly outside the realm of possibility? The idea hung in the air that the planet itself was hidden, masked by advanced technology, and only its debris, Three-Eye Atlas, had become visible as it entered the solar wind. That the comet was a piece of deliberate ancient engineering, finally revealing itself. It was an appalling thought, merging astrophysics with science fiction, yet the data insisted on it. Finch then elaborated on the specific metallic signatures they were finding. He pulled out the spectroscopic chart again, pointing to the fine lines indicating highly oxidized gold particles interspersed with traces of iridium and osmium, elements often associated with deep mantle mining or, critically, high-performance aerospace alloys. This wasn't just gold dust, it was the residue of processing. Look at this, Helena. This isn't random contamination. The ratio of gold to iridium is specific. It matches the composition profile of material found near ancient Sumerian mining sites in the Zagros Mountains. Sites that were inexplicably abandoned overnight approximately 3,800 years ago, which correlates almost perfectly with the last theoretical passage of Nibiru. Helena slowly took off her reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The silence in the stately Oxonian library became oppressive. The link between the metallurgical residues on a celestial object 600 million kilometers away and a specific archaeological site in the Middle East was the final terrifying piece of the puzzle. It suggested not just a connection, but a purpose, an intelligent design behind the comet's composition. So, the Anunnaki didn't just need gold for their atmosphere, Helena murmured, her voice tight. They needed refined, processed gold. And Three-Eye Atlas is carrying the cosmic dust from their refinery operations, perhaps a deliberate chemical signal meant to be read by specific sensors upon entry into the inner system, or perhaps just the exhaust from ancient spaceflight. Finch felt a surge of cold triumph and utter terror. He had crossed the Rubicon. He was no longer theorizing about a hypothetical planet. He was tracking the approach of a technologically advanced, resource-hungry civilization that claimed dominion over early humanity. He pulled back the charts, the neat paper edges rustling faintly. Helena, this can't go to the journals yet, not until we can definitively prove the mass behind the wake. The establishment, your colleagues, my colleagues, they'll tear us apart. We need to find independent confirmation, something solid, something that doesn't involve deciphering thousand-year-old poetry. Helena straightened, her academic caution momentarily forgotten. You're right. We need the smoking gun. We need to track the gravitational anomaly, not the dust cloud. And we need to do it without letting the major observatories know what we are truly looking for. They'll dismiss the readings as instrument drift or background noise. We need discrete equipment, perhaps those old radio telescopes the Ministry of Defence abandoned up in the Scottish Highlands. They're remote, shielded, and notoriously difficult to hack. Alistair looked at her, his expression grim. The deeper we dig into this, Helena, the more I realize why this knowledge was suppressed for millennia. It's not just about history, it's about power. If the Anunnaki are returning, someone somewhere already knows. And they are very likely tracking us, tracking them. the seriousness of their venture, shifting from a purely theoretical discussion in the dusty confines of academia to a potential security risk involving an intergalactic civilization, settled heavily upon them both. They were two academics in tweed and scarves, preparing to challenge human history and potentially the entire cosmological order, operating on a shoestring budget and fueled by fear and instant coffee. It was, Alistair reflected, a very British resistance. The old MOD radio telescope installation in the Scottish Highlands was a monument to Cold War paranoia and eventual decay. The massive dish, half covered in moss and battered by decades of harsh North Sea winds, stood sentinel against a black sky studded with unnervingly bright stars. Alistair Finch and Helena Vance, bundled in thick coats and gaiters, had driven a battered old Land Rover, hired cheaply in Inverness. The whole journey a testament to British resolve meeting dreadful infrastructure. The atmosphere was utterly oppressive, the kind of deep, biting cold that permeates bone. The only sound, apart from the wind howling through the rusting steel structures, was the frantic tapping of Alistair's fingers on the vintage, heavily shielded laptop he'd managed to commandeer from a forgotten university storage room. They were using the decommissioned telescope's feed to conduct an ultra-low frequency gravitational wave search, hoping to detect the subtle, non-Newtonian ripples caused by a massive, unknown object moving through the outer fringes of the solar system. The gravitational wake of Nibiru. This was the ultimate pivot point. If they detected the wave, the Sumerian myths were vindicated, and their scientific careers, along with humanity's perception of itself, would be utterly shattered. If they detected nothing, the golden dust on 3i Atlas was merely a bizarre, unprecedented cosmic accident, and Finch could return to the safe, predictable world of stellar classification. But he knew, deep in his gut, that the universe rarely presented convenient accidents of this magnitude. Helena was on the roof of their small, prefabricated control hut, checking the connection integrity, muttering under her breath about silly, bloody fuses. She was relying on old analog equipment that was theoretically immune to digital interference, a critical concern given Finch's mounting suspicion that their initial research data in Cambridge had been subtly, professionally scrubbed. If you've managed to keep watching without hitting pause, it's because the tension between ancient history and terrifying science has truly gripped you. So strengthen this content right now, hit the like button, and make sure to share this urgent discovery with someone who deserves to know the deeper truths lurking in the cosmos. Your support keeps us digging beyond the surface. Finch monitored the laptop screen. The raw data feed was noisy, radio static, distant air traffic, even the subtle magnetic pull of the aurora borealis, which was faintly visible tonight, shimmering green across the horizon. He had to filter out everything, searching only for the specific low-frequency signature predicted by his modified orbital model, a signature that suggested a gravitational mass approximately 10 Earths large, approaching along the orbital plane of 3i Atlas. The wind rattled the corrugated iron walls of the hut, making it sound as if giants were shuffling outside. Finch poured himself a cup of lukewarm, bitter tea from a flask. He had described the ambience extensively to himself during the drive. The damp smell of peat smoke mixed with salt air, the metallic tang of the decaying machinery, anything to distract from the mathematical horror unfolding on his screen. He remembered a conversation with his mentor years ago, an old professor who specialized in planetary defense. The professor, half joking, had said, "Alistair, the biggest threat to this planet won't be a random rock. It will be an intelligent rock. Something guided, something purposed." At the time, Finch had laughed. Now, the old man's words felt like prophecy. Hours dragged by, marked only by the dying glow of the laptop battery and the gradual accumulation of raw, useless noise. Finch felt the crushing weight of disappointment, the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, he had chased a myth too far. Perhaps the gold signatures were merely an exotic anomaly. Perhaps Sitchin was just a talented, if misguided, fiction writer. He was about to declare the night a failure, to pack up the fragile equipment and face the shame of returning to Cambridge with nothing but a severe case of hypothermia, when a faint, sustained tone appeared on the spectrum analyzer. It was below the threshold of typical astrophysical noise, a deep, pervasive hum. Finch froze. He cross-referenced the frequency. It wasn't seismic. It wasn't atmospheric. It was a consistent, non-decaying wave pattern, suggestive of a massive body accelerating against a standard orbital resistance. It was subtle, easily dismissible, but it fit his prediction perfectly. The gravitational signature of a planet. "Helena!" he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Get down here! I think we have it!" Helena scrambled into the hut, shedding moss and droplets of moisture from her coat. She leaned over Finch's shoulder, her eyes instantly locking onto the screen. Her breath hitched. "That can't be," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Alistair, look at the periodicity. It's too clean. Natural gravitational fields don't resonate like that. It looks engineered." Finch nodded grimly. "That's what's terrifying. It's the signature of a planetary mass, yes, but the wave modulation. It suggests a deliberate mechanism is minimizing its gravitational footprint until a certain distance threshold. It's a cloak, Helena. Not visual, but gravitational." They spent the next 4 hours running verification protocols, their academic training kicking in, despite the extraordinary nature of their discovery. They needed to eliminate every terrestrial or astronomical source. They cross-referenced the signal with known solar flares, distant quasar activity, and even local seismic movement. A nearby sheep farm offered its own unique set of interference patterns. Yet the hum persisted, growing infinitesimally stronger as the night wore on. The realization sunk in with terrifying clarity. The concept of Nibiru, the 12th planet, the home world of the Anunnaki, was not a myth. It was a celestial reality. And the object, 3i Atlas, was merely a beacon, the only visible residue allowed to breach the veil of the gravitational cloak. This ancient technology, capable of manipulating space-time sufficiently to hide a planet-sized object from every single modern telescope and sensor array, was beyond human comprehension. Finch leaned back, his back protesting against the hard plastic chair. He stared out the small, grimy window at the deep, uncompromising blackness of the Highland night. Why now, Helena? Why reveal the marker now? If they've been hiding for millennia, why let 3i Atlas be detected? Why risk discovery? Helena, still meticulously logging the wave data, offered a chilling hypothesis. The Anunnaki's entire operation was based on gold to repair their atmosphere. If Nibiru's atmosphere is stabilizing, they might not need our gold anymore. Or conversely, if their need is reaching critical mass, they might be accelerating the return, regardless of the risk of being seen. She paused, then added, "Or perhaps, Alistair, the object 3i Atlas isn't visible because they failed to hide it. Perhaps this is a piece of technology that fractured from the main body, a navigational component that escaped the gravitational field and is now functioning as a rogue transmitter, broadcasting the exact path of the main body." This thought offered a sliver of hope. If 3 Atlas was an uncontrolled element, then the Anunnaki might not be aware that their hidden approach was being tracked by 2 underfunded, over-caffeinated British academics in the middle of nowhere. Finch grabbed the satellite imagery of 3i Atlas again. He focused on the anomalous, slightly asymmetrical jets being produced by the object, the non-gravitational force he had noted earlier. "The propulsion, Helena, the steering, it's too precise. If it were a random chunk of debris, the outgassing would be haphazard. This object is designed to maintain a specific, stable path, acting as a gravitational guide for the larger body, keeping it locked onto the required trajectory." They were describing something fundamentally alien to known astronomical mechanics, not natural formation, but construction. This meant that 3i Atlas itself was artificial, a massive, millennia-old piece of navigation machinery designed to endure the vast emptiness of interstellar space and activate upon re-entry into the sun's magnetic field. The implications were enormous. It meant the Anunnaki weren't just visitors. They were cosmic engineers on a scale that dwarfed all of human technological history. And if they built their atmospheric repair systems using gold mined from Earth, what else did they harvest from our planet during their cyclic visits? What knowledge, what resources, what secrets were stripped away during their long documented absences? Finch stood up, stretching his stiff legs. He looked at the massive radio dish outside, its immense cold geometry suddenly seeming less like a scientific instrument and more like a colossal, unintended antenna, picking up signals it was never meant to hear. The pressure was mounting. They had confirmation of the gravitational wake, but they still needed irrefutable proof of the artificiality of 3i Atlas itself. They needed closer visual confirmation, or even better, direct chemical analysis that pointed conclusively towards manufactured materials. He paced the small confines of the hut. "We can't stay here. If this data is real, it will be visible to others. Any government agency running sensitive deep space telemetry will eventually filter out the noise and find this same signal. We need to move the data, consolidate the archaeological findings, and find a safe harbor before we become a problem for those who prefer this truth remain buried." Helena agreed, logging off the system with rapid, experienced movements. "You're right. We need to disseminate the proof now, or it will be confiscated, or worse, misfiled." "But where do we go, Alistair? Who do we trust? The moment we mention Anunnaki and gravitational cloaking to the Royal Society, we are instantly relegated to the fringes, dismissed as cranks who cracked under the strain of academia." He paused, looking at the blinking cursor on his screen, where the clean, terrifying sine wave of the gravitational anomaly persisted. "We don't go to the Royal Society, Helena. We go to the one place where truth survives, however briefly. The digital underground. We leak the raw data anonymously, forcing the global community to verify the signal themselves. We can't let them hide this. The story of the Anunnaki and Nibiru is not just about a returning planet. It's about the massive cover-up that has maintained the facade of human history for millennia. If you've reached this point, you know the stakes are impossibly high. Don't let this truth vanish into the noise. Hit that like button now, share this video widely, and comment below with your immediate thoughts. This is bigger than I thought. The journey south was fraught with paranoia. Finch and Helena had chosen the long, circuitous route, a ferry across the North Sea to mainland Europe, followed by a series of regional trains, avoiding airports and the centralized surveillance capabilities of major travel hubs. They sat in the freezing, wind-battered observation lounge of the ferry, the steel deck groaning beneath the heavy swell. Finch clutched a reinforced briefcase containing the heart of their discovery, the encrypted drives holding the raw gravitational wave data and the high-resolution images of the Sumerian tablets, cross-referenced with his orbital mechanics models. He looked worn out, his eyes red from lack of sleep, the stress beginning to manifest as nervous tics. Every official-looking person, every CCTV camera, every sudden movement on the deck felt like a threat. Helena was attempting to blend in, reading a paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice while covertly monitoring the ship's Wi-Fi network for any unusual activity, specifically tracing software or dedicated surveillance probes. "We need a better plan than just dumping the data online, Alistair," Helena whispered, her eyes glued to the book, maintaining the facade of a typical British tourist. "If we release the signal data without context, they will simply declare it noise and discredit the source. We need narrative. We need to force them to see the Sumerian connection immediately." Finch nodded, looking out at the vast, grey expanse of the North Sea. The uniformity of the water was unsettling, mirroring the uniformity of the narrative control they were fighting against. The narrative is the gold, Helena. It always has been. The Anunnaki needed gold. They engineered us to get it. And now 3i Atlas is shedding refined gold particles. That is the empirical bridge between the myth and the science. He explained his plan. They would create a comprehensive, multi-layered document. The first layer would be the scientific data, the 3i trajectory and the gravitational wave detection, packaged professionally to appeal to the global astronomical community. The second layer would be the historical analysis, the high-resolution cuneiform, and the metallurgical evidence linking the comet's composition to Earth-based mining operations. We publish it all simultaneously, targeting 3 different unlinked forums: a dark web data dump for the cryptographers, a mainstream astronomy forum for the skeptics, and a reputable investigative journalism outlet for the public narrative. Maximum saturation, minimum traceable source. He opened the briefcase just enough for Helena to glimpse the contents. Next to the drives was a single, heavily protected item, a small, dark rock, irregular in shape, slightly heavier than its size suggested. "What is that?" Helena asked, narrowing her eyes. "It's a meteorite fragment," Finch explained quietly, "found in the Arizona desert in the 1950s. Thought to be an anomalous iron meteorite. But look closely." He pointed to a small, almost invisible inclusion in the dark surface. It shone faintly, unmistakably gold. When I ran the composition, the trace elements matched perfectly with the 3i Atlas spectral analysis. This rock is a piece of Anunnaki debris, shed during a previous passage, 3,600 years ago. It's been here the whole time, miscatalogued as terrestrial contamination. The silence between them was profound. The sheer breadth of the cover-up was staggering. Not only were they hiding a planet, but they had been systematically collecting and misidentifying every piece of evidence left behind during previous cycles. Helena looked at the meteorite fragment, then at Finch. "Alistair, if this is truly Anunnaki material, it is priceless. It will tell us everything about their metallurgy, their technology, perhaps even their genetics. Which is why it cannot fall into the wrong hands," Finch confirmed, securing the briefcase shut. "It's our ultimate leverage. If the data leak fails to convince the world, the physical evidence will force the issue." After navigating European rail systems with the skill of seasoned spies, they reached a quiet, centrally located, and entirely forgettable hotel in Brussels, chosen for its proximity to major fiber optic hubs and its lack of high-level security. They set up their makeshift data center in the small, clean room, spreading cables and encrypted terminals across the patterned carpet. The act of compiling the definitive world-altering document took another 20 hours of intense, silent work. Finch wrote the complex mathematical proofs detailing the non-gravitational velocity vector of 3i Atlas and the resulting mass calculation for the hidden body. He meticulously detailed the methodology used in the Scottish Highlands to detect the specific gravitational wave signature, anticipating every possible critique from the mainstream astronomical community. Helena, meanwhile, crafted the historical argument, comparing the Enuma Elish to the Sumerian king list, which documented reigns lasting tens of thousands of years, the reigns of the Anunnaki before kingship was lowered to man, and connecting these temporal spans to the orbital period of Nibiru. She focused on the linguistic anomalies, the sudden introduction of advanced concepts of irrigation, construction, and writing, that appeared seemingly overnight in ancient Mesopotamia, suggesting rapid, intelligent intervention rather than slow human evolution. The tension in the room was palpable. Every keystroke felt like an act of rebellion. "Alistair, I need to talk about the possible repercussions," Helena said, pausing her work on the historical context. "If we are right, we are not just exposing a planetary body. We are exposing a potential, highly advanced hostile power that views humanity as a labor force. When Nibiru approaches, the texts suggest a time of upheaval, not just natural, but political and social. They might be returning to reclaim their resources, or perhaps their property. Finch looked up from his screen, his face drawn. I know. The alternative, Helena, is worse. If we keep this secret, the world remains unprepared. The current military and governmental structures are entirely blind to a threat operating outside the known celestial mechanics. They're looking for missiles or asteroids. They're not looking for a gravitationally masked planet carrying a civilization whose technological development is far beyond ours. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. The air conditioning unit hummed loudly, trying and failing to regulate the heat generated by the powerful computer systems. The Sumerian texts are clear on one point. The Anunnaki are not benevolent. They fought, they had rivalries, and they treated humans with a chilling detachment. We were disposable tools. If they return, we must assume they intend to resume control. Finch then focused on the metallurgical analysis again. He added a detailed appendix about the isotopic decay rates found in the meteorite fragment compared to terrestrial gold deposits. The decay rate in the Anunnaki material suggested exposure to extremely high levels of radiation, consistent with prolonged periods in deep space beyond the protective shield of the sun's magnetosphere, an environment too harsh for conventional carbon-based life to survive without advanced shielding. This implied the Anunnaki were either non-carbon-based or protected by highly sophisticated vessel technology. This added layer of detail, moving from historical myth to verifiable material science, was their shield against instant dismissal. The document was now nearing 100 pages, a complex tapestry of science and archaeology. Helena finished formatting the last section, a timeline comparing 3i Atlas's projected trajectory with historical records of global catastrophes and sudden technological leaps. She looked at Finch, her expression resolute. It's ready. The die is cast, Alistair. Ready to press the button? Finch took one last look at the meteorite fragment lying innocuously next to the encrypted drive. The future of human consciousness rested on this single, reckless act of digital dissemination. Ready, he confirmed. If you've remained invested in this complex unraveling of history and cosmic horror, it's clear you value truth above comfort. Don't let this moment of revelation pass. Strengthen this effort. Hit that like button now and share this link widely. Comment below, the truth is out there, to confirm you're part of this critical community. The response to the anonymous data leak was instantaneous and cataclysmic. Within hours of the documents being uploaded simultaneously across 4 continents, the world's academic and media infrastructures went into meltdown. The mainstream astronomy forums were the first to react. Initially, the response was uniform dismissal. Posts with titles like "Sitchin fan fiction meets bad data" dominated the thread. Experts cited instrument drift, gravitational lensing misinterpretation, and, most damningly, the professional equivalent of mockery, amateur fantasy. The identity of the source, hidden behind layers of proxies and encryption, was irrelevant. The content itself was deemed toxic. However, the sheer complexity and detail of the mathematical proof, particularly the non-Newtonian velocity vector calculations for 3i Atlas, began to attract the attention of serious computational astrophysicists. These professionals, armed with supercomputers, started running the numbers themselves. Within 12 hours, whispers turned into alarms. The gravitational wave signature, while faint and easily dismissed as background noise, was mathematically verifiable. It matched the prediction for a massive object orbiting beyond the Kuiper Belt, an object they had been searching for, only now they had a terrifying context for it. The media coverage lagged slightly, then exploded. Investigative journalists, intrigued by the sensational claim of ancient alien planet returning, began to cross-reference the Sumerian texts and the gold mining evidence. The discovery of the matching isotopic profile between the 3I Atlas coma and terrestrial gold deposits, verified by two independent mineralogy labs who had their own internal debate raging, was the tipping point. The fringe theory suddenly slammed into hard science. At the high-level operational centers of the European Space Agency and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, panic was a controlled, icy thing. They had been tracking 3I Atlas, of course, but as a standard interstellar object. They had noted the unusual metallic signature, attributing it to an unknown type of asteroid formation. They had even seen the faint, persistent gravitational hum in their deep space telemetry, and just as Finch had predicted, they had filtered it out as instrument noise. Now, faced with the meticulously detailed leaked analysis, they were forced to confront the impossible. A retired ESA director, known only as the Engineer, was quoted anonymously in a major German newspaper. "We dismissed the anomaly because the implications were unacceptable. We would rather assume our instruments were faulty than assume reality included Nibiru." The true anxiety for the global power structures wasn't the arrival of a planet, but the revelation that they had been blind, either through incompetence or deliberate historical suppression. If the Sumerians knew, why didn't the modern defense agencies? Finch and Helena watched the chaos unfold from a cramped internet cafe near the Gare du Midi in Brussels. Every new headline, every panicked government statement confirmed their success. The world was forced to talk about the Anunnaki, but the success came with a terrifying side effect: the rapid militarization of information. Finch and Helena had moved to a new, anonymous location, a poorly furnished safe house arranged through an old contact of Helena's, a disgraced historian who specialized in suppressed Roman history. They were isolated, relying on encrypted satellite phones and burner laptops. The digital backlash had begun. The data they had leaked was being systematically corrupted on mainstream servers. The images of the cuneiform tablets were blurred. The mathematical proofs were edited with subtle, undetectable errors that would eventually lead verification efforts down dead ends. It was a sophisticated surgical cleansing operation, suggesting resources far beyond a simple government IT department. This was coordinated international suppression. "They're trying to roll back the clock," Helena observed, watching a major US news network attempt to debunk the gold theory using newly discovered and clearly fabricated counter-evidence. "They can't unring the bell, but they can deafen the audience." Finch was preoccupied with a more immediate danger. He had used a very specific, obscure, and proprietary filtering algorithm developed during his PhD years to isolate the gravitational signal in Scotland. This algorithm was buried deep within the leaked data. Now someone, or something, was actively tracing the usage pattern of that unique algorithm across the globe, searching for the source. "They're coming for the raw data, Helena. They want the original files to destroy the chain of custody, to make sure no one can replicate the finding," Finch said, his voice taut with strain. He was starting to look gaunt, fueled purely by adrenaline and the grim satisfaction of watching the world's narrative crumble. The question of who they were was central. Was it a coalition of world governments? A deep state collective dedicated to maintaining the historical lie? Or was it something more terrifying, a residual presence of the Anunnaki themselves, left behind millennia ago to monitor and control Earth, now activating in response to the detection of their homeworld? Finch expanded on the concept of they. He recounted his increasing paranoia during his final days in Cambridge. The subtle system crashes, the files that vanished on his personal computer, always related to Sumerian translations or his nascent Nibiru models. He hadn't thought much of it then, dismissing it as academic rivalry or bad hardware. Now, he realized it was reconnaissance. They were testing the limits of his research, gently probing his intentions. He pointed to the satellite phone they were using. The technology needed to consistently monitor and neutralize high-level digital data across the globe without leaving a trace implies a global network, a system of systems that operates outside the standard jurisdiction of the UN or NATO. The Anunnaki didn't just leave their gold, they left their guardians, entities, perhaps human descendants or advanced AI, tasked with maintaining the veil. Helena considered this. She pulled up an ancient Mesopotamian reference to the Igigi, the lesser Anunnaki, the watchers or assistants. Myth suggested the Igigi eventually grew restless and revolted. If the Igigi were real, Alistair, perhaps they are the ones enforcing the cover-up now. A caretaker species, perhaps, whose entire purpose is ensuring the planet remains stable and quiet until the owners return, she suggested. But why? Why protect the secret so fiercely? Finch had an answer prepared, a terrifying synthesis of archaeology and psychology. Control. The moment humanity realizes its origins are manufactured, that our existence is the result of genetic experimentation by technologically superior beings who view us as property, every morale, religious and political structure collapses. The fear of chaos keeps the truth buried, and the return of the Anunnaki guarantees that chaos. The Guardians are simply following their protocol, maintain order until the master arrives. This hypothesis deepened the horror. They weren't just fighting governments. They were fighting an ancient, institutionalized protocol designed for mass psychological control. Finch knew they had to disappear entirely. They had provided the signal and the context. Now they needed to survive long enough for the wider scientific community to force the issue. The focus shifted back to the science. Despite the active efforts to muddy the waters, independent research groups began to confirm the gravitational wave signal. The signal wasn't just there, it was accelerating. Finch ran his final, most critical model. He needed to know the true size of the object generating the gravitational wake. If it was a planet, its size and density were key to predicting its orbital decay and closest approach point. The sheer scale of the calculations required access to a high-powered system. They found a temporary solution, hijacking unused processing cycles from a massive decentralized computing network used for predicting climate change models. A poetic irony, using climate data infrastructure to track the return of a world-altering entity. The terminal screen glowed with the results, the mass estimate for the hidden body, based on the accumulated gravitational perturbations, came back. 10.2 Earth masses, a super-Earth, definitely planetary. But the orbital calculations revealed something far more unsettling about 3I Atlas. It's not debris, Finch said, staring at the projected orbital path. It's not a scout. It's a navigational buoy. And it's not just marking the way. It's initiating a massive, deliberate course correction for the main body. He explained to Helena the mechanism. 3 Atlas, the small, golden-infused comet, was acting as a gravitational anchor. Using its non-gravitational propulsion system, perhaps a highly concentrated solar-powered drive, it was subtly altering the local gravitational field ahead of the main planetary body. It was like a miniature tugboat steering an immense cloaked supertanker through the tight constraints of the inner solar system. This meant the Anunnaki were not passively returning on a predetermined orbit. They were actively guiding Nibiru. And the appearance of 3I Atlas wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of the final approach maneuver. If this deepening mystery has you questioning everything you thought you knew about our place in the universe, then you are exactly where you need to be. Don't lose the thread now. Commit to the search for truth. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel immediately, and leave a comment. The Watchers are real. The implications of active guidance were catastrophic. If the Anunnaki could steer their planet, they could choose their closest approach distance, their orbital velocity, and most critically, the timing of their arrival. The 3,600-year cycle was merely a baseline. The true return was subject to their technological will. Finch cross-referenced the current, accelerated velocity with the Sumerian prophecies of global flood and cataclysm. The ancient texts claimed that Nibiru's return was often accompanied by massive geological disturbances, tectonic shifts, and abrupt climate change. If the planet was accelerating, the gravitational drag on Earth and Mars would be exponentially higher. Helena was quiet, inputting the gravitational data into a geological perturbation model. The results were immediate and devastating. Alistair, if the projected course correction holds, the gravitational influence will hit Earth exactly 18 months from now. It will induce a 1.2-degree axial tilt change, triggering global megatsunamis and unprecedented seismic activity. The Great Deluge reborn. Finch felt a dizzying sense of historical closure. The Sumerians weren't describing mythological events, they were describing precise astronomical mechanics. The deluge wasn't divine punishment, it was planetary physics. He looked at the small, dark meteorite fragment, the Anunnaki debris. It was a fragment of the ultimate technology, a signal of their mastery over physics, and a warning of their profound, destructive indifference to the smaller, fragile world they had engineered for their own purposes. The increasing tension forced Finch and Helena to delve deeper into the structural evidence left by the Anunnaki. If they were cosmic engineers, what structures on Earth were not merely primitive temples, but sophisticated installations related to their operations? Helena focused on the ziggurats, the massive, stepped pyramids of ancient Mesopotamia. Mainstream archaeology classified them as temples dedicated to local deities. Helena, however, saw them as landing platforms, navigational aids, and potentially massive energy receptors. The alignment of the major ziggurats, particularly in Ur and Babylon, is not just celestial, it's energetic, Helena argued, projecting three-dimensional schematics onto the wall of the safe house. They align perfectly with the predicted trajectory of Nibiru during its crossing phase. They are beacons, Alistair, designed to guide the planet's gravitational field, ensuring a stable, safe approach for the Anunnaki's vessels. Finch integrated this concept with the gold mining imperative. Gold, they knew, was critical for Nibiru's atmosphere, possibly used as a monoatomic element to shield against radiation. But gold also possesses unique superconducting properties. What if the ziggurats were not just guides, but power relays? Finch mused, tracing a line on the schematic. The Anunnaki needed massive amounts of refined gold, and they needed colossal energy to process it and transport it across the vacuum of space. The ziggurats, built in geologically active regions, could have been harnessing tectonic or geothermal energy, refined through superconducting gold circuits, perhaps even using a type of zero-point energy derived from localized gravitational anomalies induced by Nibiru's crossing. This theory explained the immense effort required to build such structures and the sudden abandonment of sites when the Anunnaki departed. Once Nibiru passed, the necessary gravitational field weakened, the energy source vanished, and the structures became inert relics, mere temples. This intellectual leap, from stone structures to space-age energy plants, solidified the terrifying technological gap between the Anunnaki and humanity. We had mistaken their power plants for shrines, their orbital mechanics lessons for creation myths. They were working under extreme pressure. News reports confirmed that several national security agencies, including the UK's GCHQ and the US National Reconnaissance Office, were now officially acknowledging the highly unusual velocity of 3I Atlas, though they steadfastly refused to link it to any planetary body or ancient mythology. The official narrative was hardening. 3 Atlas was a unique, dangerous cosmic object that required immediate, focused study. Finch knew what focused study meant. They were preparing to intercept or destroy the object. If 3I Atlas was a navigational buoy, destroying it might destabilize Nibiru's trajectory, leading to an uncontrolled, far more catastrophic approach. Finch elaborated further on the mathematical precision embedded within the cuneiform tablets. Helena had discovered sections detailing highly complex logarithmic tables, far exceeding the arithmetic capacity attributed to the Sumerians. These tables weren't used for commerce or simple accounting. They were required for predicting long-period orbital mechanics and calculating the mass distribution of a distant, unseen planet. "We are talking about knowledge transfer," Finch stressed, pacing the room. The Anunnaki didn't just give them writing, they gave them a functional, highly detailed model of the solar system, specifically including Nibiru's path. It was essential operational data, perhaps required for coordinating mining and transport logistics during the crossing window. He contrasted this sophisticated data with the modern human reaction. Despite having access to telescopes and complex algorithms, the scientific community had spent decades looking for a planet only because of mathematical anomalies, completely ignoring the perfectly preserved, detailed records left by the Sumerians. The arrogance of modern science, dismissing myth as fantasy, had blinded the world to its own history. The real tragedy is that the answers were always there, written in mud, stored in the basements of our most prestigious institutions, Finch lamented, gesturing towards the digitized image of the cuneiform. We were too focused on the elegance of our own models to see the blunt truth contained in theirs. Helena had an unsettling addition. She pointed to a passage from the Sumerian king list that detailed the transition from Anunnaki rule to human kingship, a period marked by massive floods and the burning of cities. The final departure was violent, Alistair. They didn't just pack up their bags, they wiped the slate clean. They erased their footprints, destroyed their own infrastructure. The very ziggurats became ruins. Why? To maintain the myth of their divinity, perhaps, or to ensure that no technology was left behind for the surviving human population to reverse engineer. This theory suggested that the Anunnaki were not only masterful engineers, but also ruthless information controllers. If they were capable of erasing their presence so completely millennia ago, what were they capable of now, in the age of digital information? The moment of crisis arrived with a cold digital ping. Finch's encrypted system, designed to monitor global deep space telemetry for anomalies, flagged a catastrophic event. The orbital path of 3I Atlas had just undergone its most significant, most unnatural adjustment yet. "The buoy is firing its thrusters at maximum capacity," Finch announced, his face pale under the glow of the screen. "It's not guiding Nibiru anymore, it's pulling it. The gravitational cloak must be breaking down under the strain, or they are executing an emergency maneuver." The acceleration was tremendous. Based on the new data, the projected closest approach distance was drastically reduced, and the 18-month window had tightened to less than 6 months. The gravitational influence would not be a mere axial tilt. It would be a severe, potentially planet-shattering tidal pull. 6 months. Helena repeated, her voice steady despite the horror. "We have 6 months until the planetary physics of the inner solar system fundamentally change. We need to alert the public now, not just with data, but with a warning." Finch was already assembling the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. He had been working on a complex decryption of a small, repetitive code sequence found within the cuneiform. A sequence often dismissed as a religious mantra. He now realized it wasn't a mantra, it was a countdown mechanism. The sequence correlated precisely with astronomical measurements of Nibiru's approach velocity. It was the Anunnaki's internal scheduling tool, detailing the remaining days until Shargal, the Great Lord's return. If this constant flow of devastating reality checks has kept you glued to the screen, then you are one of the rare few truly seeking to understand the deep, suppressed history of Earth. This quest for knowledge requires massive support. Please hit the like button now, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. The countdown has begun. Finch pressed the execute button on his decryption program. The result flashed on the screen, a number starkly numerical, brutally simple. 153 days. "That's it, Helena," he whispered. "The Anunnaki gave the Sumerians the exact day of their return. The date is embedded in their sacred texts, and now 3i Atlas confirms the schedule. They are coming back in 153 days. They knew that releasing this final, definitive warning would invite the full force of the Watchers, the shadowy enforcement mechanism, down upon them. They had crossed the line from academic investigation to existential threat. Finch prepared a single, succinct message, meant for global dissemination via a network of trusted, decentralized journalists and independent researchers, the only people he felt might bypass the controlled media blackout. The message was deliberately stripped of all academic language, intended to provoke immediate, survival-based action. Urgent global alert. The object 3i Atlas is confirmed to be the navigational component for the returning planetary body known in Sumerian texts as Nibiru. Gravitational analysis confirms a planetary mass, approx 10 Earth masses, is accelerating towards the inner solar system. Closest approach is projected in 153 days. This event will trigger catastrophic geological upheaval. Humanity must prepare for a civilization-level threat. This is not a drill. Stop looking at the skies. Start securing your future. As he initiated the upload sequence, the lights in the safe house flickered violently, plunging the room into momentary darkness before emergency power kicked in. The heavy silence was broken by a sound that wasn't the wind or the hum of machinery. It was the distinct sound of a heavy lorry braking violently outside the flat, followed by the metallic clang of boots hitting the pavement. "They found us," Helena stated calmly, grabbing a small, heavy rucksack containing their emergency supplies and, crucially, the meteorite fragment. The upload must have triggered an immediate response. Finch watched the progress bar on his screen crawl towards completion. 98%. 99%. The door to the flat suddenly buckled under a colossal impact. The door burst inward, revealing three figures clad in dark, nondescript tactical gear. Not soldiers, but something far more unsettling. Silent, efficient, and heavily armed. They moved with the chilling precision of operatives trained for asset retrieval and permanent silencing. Finch and Helena bolted for the back window, smashing the glass and scrambling out onto the fire escape. The air outside was cold, sharp with the smell of urban decay and damp concrete. They were high above a narrow, cluttered alleyway, the typical claustrophobic architecture of inner-city Brussels. "Go! Down the fire escape!" Finch shouted, realizing the importance of the briefcase containing the physical meteorite fragment, the undeniable proof. They descended rapidly, the metal structure protesting loudly under their weight. Behind them, the sounds of controlled destruction emanated from the safe house, the methodical search for the drives, the deliberate erasure of their makeshift control center. They hit the alley ground running, adrenaline masking the pain of the descent. Their escape was blind. They simply needed distance, relying on the anonymity of the crowded European city to swallow them whole. Finch ran, his mind still working through the implications of the countdown. 153 days. The world had less than 6 months to pivot from denial to global preparation. He wondered if his message would even survive the digital storm. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The three dark figures were already rappelling down the fire escape, moving with a speed and coordination that suggested training far beyond typical governmental security forces. These were the Watchers, the agents of the ancient cover-up, highly funded, highly skilled, and now highly motivated to reclaim the stolen truth. Helena, despite her age, was surprisingly swift, darting into a narrow passage between two buildings, heading towards the lights of a main thoroughfare. "The train station!" she yelled back. "We need to get to the Eurostar terminal." "Get back to the UK. It's the last place they will look for us immediately." Finch followed, the briefcase banging painfully against his hip. He considered the sheer magnitude of the truth they carried, the impending return of an advanced civilization, the proof of humanity's engineered origin, the meticulously concealed schedule of the apocalypse. It was a burden too heavy for two people, yet one they couldn't possibly abandon. He focused on the physical sensations, the burning in his lungs, the metallic taste of fear, the rough texture of the brick wall brushing against his sleeve. This focus grounded him, pulling him away from the incomprehensible scale of the cosmological event they had just triggered. They burst out onto a busy street, instantly merging with the late-night foot traffic. The sudden shift from quiet desperation to public anonymity was jarring. They were just two people in sensible UK clothing, seemingly tourists rushing for a late connection. Finch used the opportunity to observe his pursuers. The three figures stopped abruptly at the mouth of the alley, scanning the street with unnerving machine-like efficiency. They weren't panicking, they were calculating angles, anticipating trajectory, using logistics, not instinct. This confirmed Finch's earlier suspicion. These were highly trained operatives, operating under a mandate that surpassed national boundaries and legal constraints. They were the silent enforcement arm of the Anunnaki legacy. He pulled Helena into the shadow of a large, brightly lit shop window displaying expensive lace. He forced himself to breathe slowly, watching the operatives communicate via faint wrist-mounted devices. They weren't using recognizable radio chatter. The communication was instantaneous, silent, and likely highly directional. Another example of technology far ahead of the public curve. "They're dividing up," Helena murmured, reading the body language of the pursuers. "They know we're on foot. They are trying to herd us." Finch spotted a large, unmarked black van, a surveillance vehicle, idling further down the street. The net was closing rapidly. They couldn't make it to the Eurostar station. It was too far, too exposed. "The metro, Helena, down into the tunnels. Break line of sight," Finch instructed, urgency overriding his usual academic composure. He knew the risks of being trapped underground, but the alternative was immediate capture and permanent silence. They plunged down the nearest metro entrance, the air immediately turning warmer, heavier, smelling of ozone and stale fried food. The noise of the city dissolved into the rhythmic, subterranean echo of approaching trains. As they descended, Finch felt the massive responsibility of the meteorite fragment in his briefcase. If he was captured, the physical proof linking 3I Atlas, Sumeria, and the Anunnaki's gold mining mandate would be lost forever, allowing the Watchers to reset the historical lie. He had to protect it. It was the only tangible piece of the new, terrifying history. They reached the platform just as a train pulled in, its doors hissing open. They pushed themselves into the crowded carriage, instantly surrounded by the anonymous faces of commuters, the very people Finch was risking his life to warn. He noticed a momentary flicker of recognition in the eyes of one commuter, a young man scrolling through his phone, perhaps reading the urgent anonymous data dump Finch had just released. That faint spark of recognition was the only confirmation he needed. The message was out. The world was beginning to stir. Squeezed against the humid window of the metro carriage, Finch felt the train rumble forward, disappearing into the dark tunnels beneath Brussels. He and Helena were momentarily safe, but the true threat, the astronomical countdown, remained. 153 days until the physics of their world would be violently reshaped. The narrative of the Anunnaki was no longer a matter of historical debate or mythological speculation. It was a matter of planetary survival. The Watchers, the ancient guardians of the secret, were hunting them, proving that the threat was not merely cosmic, but immediate and intelligent. Finch held the briefcase tight, feeling the small, cold mass of the meteorite fragment inside. That fragment was the proof, the undeniable link between an advanced civilization's need for gold and their engineered planet. It confirmed that humanity was not the master of its own destiny, but a managed resource. The true enigma of the Anunnaki wasn't if they existed, but what they intended to do upon their accelerated return. Would they resume mining operations, treating the current 7 billion inhabitants as simply an overgrown slave population to be culled and managed? Or had the millennia changed them? Had they evolved beyond their need for gold, returning perhaps as observers, or terrifyingly as judges? The Sumerian texts, rich in detail, fell silent on the nature of the Anunnaki's final full return. They spoke only of cataclysm and the resetting of the order, a narrative that offered no comfort, only dread. Finch realized the goal now wasn't to prevent the arrival. That was impossible. The goal was to force the global disclosure of the truth before the Anunnaki arrived, ensuring that humanity faced its creators with full knowledge of its own engineered history. Knowledge was the only weapon they had against a technologically superior adversary. The train rattled on, speeding them away from the immediate danger, but only further into the inescapable future. The comet 3I Atlas, the small golden-tinged shepherd, continued its trajectory, guiding the massive unseen planet towards its final destination. The shadow of Nibiru had awakened, and the crossing was imminent. The profound question remained: when the Anunnaki returned, would they recognize the engineered creation they had left behind? Or would they simply see a planet rich in resources, ripe for reclamation, and a slave species overdue for disciplinary action? The journey into the unknown was just beginning, leading not through the stars, but back to the dusty, terrible truth buried deep in the history of the Earth itself. If this content has utterly opened your mind to the possibilities of suppressed history and cosmic intervention, we need to know you reached this point. Comment below right now, Chige Ateofim, I reached the end. This helps us understand who is truly committed to seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel immediately and activate the notification bell, because the next chapters of this investigation will dive even deeper into the secrets of the Watchers and the impending return. Don't leave without clicking the next video. It is the logical continuation of this perilous journey. The Anunnaki are coming. The ancient texts predicted it. The modern science confirms it. The true history of Earth is about to be revealed, not by scholars or priests, but by the implacable, accelerating force of a planet racing towards us from the deep blackness of space. The only question left is, what will you do with the time you have left?